getting coffee with a friend recently, and we were partaking in our favorite pastime, complaining about our jobs. Specifically, the worst customers that we have to deal with. When my friend Julia goes, "Ugh, I wish I could just tell customers when they're being the worst. Girls come into the salon all the time and ask if they could just bring a friend into the waxing appointment with them," to which I always go, "Yeah, of course, but it's actually like super annoying." Wait, why is that annoying? I mean, I've never done it. Like, I have never brought my friend Lainey into a waxing appointment with me to distract me from the pain. I wouldn't do something like that. But why is it annoying when people do that? I asked. Because, she explained, the room is so small. It's literally designed for 2 people. So adding a third person makes the whole thing a lot more ergonomically challenging. It makes my job harder. It makes the appointment last longer. But I always acquiesce their request because I want to provide a good service and earn my tip. And I don't know, the customer is always right, I guess. So we kept chatting, but inside I was appalled, and not just at our insane beauty standards and the great lengths that I personally go to achieve them. You see, I have been bringing my friend Lainey into salon appointments with me for years, and I had no idea that I was being the worst. I thought I was being fun, but I had never thought of it from my esthetician's perspective, I guess, and I certainly hadn't worked in a salon before, so I just didn't know any better. After this reality check from Julia, I started thinking about all of the customers that I complain are the worst. I work at a restaurant. I serve breakfast and lunch. And I couldn't help but wonder how many of these difficult customers were like me and didn't realize they were being difficult. How often are customers unintentionally being the worst? In the past, I have taken a few terrible customers' behavior quite personally. But obviously there's some disconnect, because nobody's walking into the restaurant with the goal of ruining my shift. Everybody wants a great experience with great service, but difficult customers get in their own way of receiving the best service. At my job, when I deal with these terrible customers, I'm working around the challenges they create more than I am giving them the good service that they deserve. So I thought it would be interesting for us to take a few specific looks at these examples of people who come into the restaurant and are unknowingly being the worst. But before I get into the thick of it, I do have to say, every server has a horror story of people throwing things at them or calling them names, and these people, they're the worst of the worst, and they know it. So there's no point in taking a deeper look at their unbelievably bad behavior. I want to focus on the people who, like me, shudder at the thought of being the worst. By a show of hands, how many of you would cringe to discover that you were, in fact, a nightmare customer? Okay, a lot of you, right? Whew, thank goodness. And there are a few of you with a very cool, I don't care what people think about me attitude. And that is very cool. I'm actually very jealous. But it's important to remember the consequence of being a bad customer is bad service. So if Julia could shed some light on how I could be a less difficult customer at a salon, perhaps I could do the same for those of us who could stand to be better guests when dining out. So flipping through the Rolodex of difficult customers in my mind, I flip past the woman who threw change at my face and other absolute terrors to the first person I think might be unaware that they're being the worst. In this first example today, let's call him Jerry, which is a name I just made up and not the name of a really mean guy who sat at table 5 a few weeks ago. Jerry will walk into the restaurant where the host will greet him and then show him to his table. But on the way there, he'll spy a dirty table across the restaurant before pointing to it and going, "Oh, I'll just sit there." The host will accommodate his request. Jerry sits down and he is unknowingly off on the wrong foot. His server is going to take a few minutes to get to him, and then Jerry feels ignored and now annoyed. So let me explain, which requires a little bit of insider restaurant information. When first arriving at a restaurant, a host will often say, "Oh, your table is ready." But what they technically mean is your server is ready. Yes, a table is open and clean, but much more importantly, there is a server assigned to that table who has the time to give you the great service that you deserve. So generally speaking, you're going to get the best service sitting at the table you're first assigned. But don't get me wrong, asking to move is not unreasonable. I've certainly asked to be closer to a TV or farther away from an air conditioner. But next time this happens, consider articulating your concerns to the host, rather than pulling a Jerry and just plopping down wherever you like. Explain you would rather sit in a booth than this table, and you are happy to wait for said booth to be ready. Your patience and communication will be appreciated and most likely reciprocated with great, friendly service. Jerry isn't the only one guilty of being the worst without realizing it. Our second example, let's call her Amber, another name inspired by no one that I know personally, is also guilty of a seemingly innocent faux pas. Amber is chatty and very sweet and friendly with the staff, but being the social butterfly that she is always asking to just add a couple chairs to whatever table she's sitting at. She's bumped into a friend and they've texted a few others, and that's like totally no big deal, right? Well, wrong. Here's some insider scoop. Many restaurants have the maximum amount of seats available per table to maximize spending. And additionally, most restaurants are up to a standard fire safety code. Hopefully. So in that case, then most tables cannot safely have a couple of chairs added to them. For example, adding a chair to the end of a foretop could end up blocking the walkway for other customers and the restaurant staff, which is obviously a concern in case of an emergency, but it also puts whoever is sitting there in harm's way of the soup of the day being spilled down their backs. When we offer to move Amber to a larger table, she usually goes, "Oh, it's no big deal, we're all friends, we're gonna just squeeze in." Which would be no skin off my nose if Amber was at a booth. But when she carelessly pulls 2 or 3 extra chairs into my walkway, it suddenly becomes this like huge obstacle course, especially when I've got to bring them 6 mimosas very precariously placed on a tray. You may have noticed with both Jerry and Amber that they both have a tendency or habit of using the word just. I will just sit there. We're just gonna add a couple chairs, or I'll just order something off the menu. When talking to your server, adding and emphasizing the word just implies that your question is actually kind of presumptuous or rhetorical. It proposes that your ideas are super easy and simple, so we can just do that, and don't we all just agree, and then we could just move on. If there is anything that you take away from this talk, let it just be to ask your server honest and open questions, and try not to disguise a demand with a rhetorical question. In our last example, let's call him Ben, which is, again, inspired by nobody. Ben is a lovely, low-maintenance customer. He orders off the menu, his food arrives, and there's something wrong with it, so he has to send it back. And no, sending his food back does not make Ben the worst. It is a common misconception that sending your food back at a restaurant is what makes you the worst. The restaurant, first and foremost, wants you to enjoy your meal. So if something is undercooked or overcooked, your server in the kitchen will fix it. And we're not mad at you, we promise. But most customers tend to do one of 2 things. They either take 5 minutes to profusely apologize and tell me, "Oh my God, like I am so sorry, I literally never do this, I never do this." Or they berate me and they yell at me and say, "Oh, you obviously weren't listening when you were taking my order," before finally arriving at, "Can I have it cooked more?" When Ben comes in and then broaches the topic like he's breaking up with me and begins a long, "It's not you, it's me" speech, he's just wasting precious time. When sending your food back, just quickly and clearly explain the problem. "This is a bit too bloody, can I please have it cooked more?" "Great, I'll grab your plate, I'm running to the kitchen, and we're well on our way to getting you taken care of." What's important to notice is Jerry, Amber, and Ben, they aren't trying to be difficult, but they are making their server's job harder without realizing it. They, like me at the salon, just don't know any better. So then, what's the solution? A bunch more TED Talks about restaurant etiquette. Or a less aggressive approach. We've all heard the saying, "The customer is always right," right? Well, I have to say, hot take, but the customer is not always right. I propose that we reframe our thinking to the customer always has a right to be comfortable. The customer has a right to ask, to request, and to start a conversation. But what's so flawed in the customer is always right mentality is it doesn't acknowledge the possibility that the customer may in fact be naive or misinformed or unaware of something. I mean, despite what my boyfriend thinks, nobody is always right all of the time. Let's look at the Amber example. Amber has every right to ask to add chairs, but she shouldn't just get to do so because she wants to. She's unaware of the safety concerns and the walkway hazards for those around her, but she does it without a second thought because as a paying customer, she believes she's right. when we operate with this mentality, we conduct ourselves with a sense of entitlement and a gimme this attitude. My current boss, Jess, really explains it best. Going to a restaurant is not unlike going to your friend's house for dinner. You would follow house rules and you would use polite manners. I was curious to see if anyone else was dealing with customers suffering from this "the customer is always right" mentality. So I did a social experiment. I took an Instagram poll. I asked my followers to message me stories about customers unknowingly being the worst in their line of work, and the results were well beyond my expectations. The stories were infuriating and fascinating and so funny. I have to share with you one quick personal favorite, which was a gentleman who worked at an ice cream shop explained that customers will return to the ice cream shop and complain that their ice cream is melting. But as I suspected, many people were dealing with their own Jerrys or Ambers, people who were making their job harder and making their own experience worse for themselves. For example, a flight attendant explained that passengers opening the closed overhead bins are always wasting time. Her announcement over the intercom that the closed overhead bins are full and she'll happily check their bags is ignored, and then boarding and takeoff is slowed down for everybody. In some cases, it went beyond customers just thinking they're right and believing that they're experts at something they're just not. A music technician who works at a recording studio explained that recording artists will rent his studio but decline his services to help them record. They'll be like, no, we know how to do it, we know better, only to fail at recording themselves properly, wasting time and disrespecting not only him but also his workplace. And this wasn't just true for the music technician. I heard from nurse technicians, locksmiths, IT workers, tour guides, so many different professions explaining this same phenomena of customers and clients thinking they know better only to make their problem worse. And sometimes people actually had really good intentions. A speech pathologist working in a medical setting explained that family members speaking on behalf of patients, even when directed not to, can be very detrimental to her diagnosis. Each question posed to the patient serves a specific purpose in her diagnosis, figuring out if they're oriented to their situation or can find the right words to express themselves. So when a family member speaks on behalf of the patient, they end up missing out on key information. And this was true for other physicians as well. Sometimes customers aren't just annoying. They're very well intentioned, but by not staying in their own lane are making the problem worse for themselves. By disrespecting the other party's time, space, or expertise, they end up ruining the experience that they're paying for. And it's sort of doing an unproductive song and dance that I find myself doing with every nightmare customer that comes into my restaurant, which I'll continue to do, day after day, week after week, until I get famous and quit. Which it's going to be any day now, very soon. When we're customers, we could stand to operate with a little less entitlement and a little more empathy. We can ask honest and open questions rather than rhetorical ones. We could behave like polite guests rather than kings of the castle. And on the other side, when we're the ones working, we could stand to do the same. We can operate with more patience and communication rather than writing somebody off and calling them the worst. We don't have to look far to see an example of two parties operating so egocentrically that nothing gets fixed and more conflicts arise. So on a micro level, in our day-to-day interactions, we could do our best to just do the opposite. And whether it's at a restaurant, or a salon, or an airplane, or anywhere else, holding yourself accountable and being a better customer will reward you with a better experience. And you could sleep easy at night knowing you're not someone's nightmare customer. Thank you.